I'm super excited about this interview today because for me it shows such courage, resilience and grit. Trevor Watts is the Queensland Shadow Minister for Police, Border Patrol and Corrections. Trevor announced in Parliament that something more needed to be done to raise awareness and support for the many dyslexic Australians. His speech really moved me. For the first time in Australia, adults with dyslexia from all walks of life are standing up and having their voices heard. Welcome to the show, Trevor.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
So, Trevor, we met you in October during National Dyslexic Awareness Month, where you talked to us about your dyslexia, which you hadn't really spoken about in public very often. What was life like growing up for you?
I grew up in England, just east of London, and school was, I had a lot of fun at school, but that's because I was fairly naughty. The thing that sticks in my mind is the sort of dreaded, 10 spellings per week. And the way it worked at my school was whoever got the lowest in the class, and there was sort of about 38 of us in the class, you got the privilege of going up to the board and writing out the letters of how it should have been spelt as everybody else called them out for you, which was very helpful, except for, occasionally you'd write a letter, a B as a D or a backward E, or, eventually you just didn't want to go up. So, because I was often, pretty much every week, I was bottom of the class. So, I learned to misbehave prior to the spelling test. So that was obviously, I reflect back on that now as a young child, and that was a fairly obvious symptom that, for whatever reason, under-resourced, lack of awareness, sort of 40 however many years ago that is, and I slipped through the cracks. So I sort of treated education as a place to catch up with my mates, where I could have some fun. And, I guess I never really imagined that I was stupid, but I did try to avoid certain amounts of work, particularly, everything that was written and reading based, I would avoid. So, whenever we were doing practical tasks, I was always really enthusiastic because I wanted to do those.
And so was it the same kind of experience when you went through into secondary school? Or did you find secondary school easier?
Secondary school was a bit different. The school I went to was streamed from 1 to 15. So I distinctly remember the first time it really dawned on me was we were all streamed for maths, and we're all sitting in the assembly hall, and they're calling names out to go to the class, and they started at the top. And so they've called the top sort of 35 or whatever it was out to go to the set one for maths, as it was called. I obviously wasn't listening, and so anyway, they've gone through the whole school, and everybody's been called out to go to their classes, and I'm still sitting there. And I've gone up, and they said, weren't you listening? You're supposed to be have gone to Mrs. Broom's class, which was a set one maths class. And I sort of said, no, I think that must be Adrian. There was another boy called Adrian Watts at my school. I said, no, I think that must be another boy, like that must be a mistake. And they sort of insisted it wasn't. And I went along, and that was the first time, I guess, where I realised that potentially I'm not stupid. I just I'm acquiring knowledge differently. And so I got into that maths class, and I found it really difficult because a lot of my work was not neat at all. And Mrs. Broom made you use ink pen and red lines and mark it all out and everything else. And I used to get all the answers correct, but I'd be made to do the work again and again and again until it was not smudged and it was neat and tidy and it was to her liking.
So Mrs. Broom really affected you all these years later. You can still remember her name.
I remember her very clearly. And to be honest, she probably taught me some really good quality basic maths, because I would be one of the first finished, and I'd have to do it 3 times compared to everybody else. So by the time we got through it, I knew it. And then it was the same, so physics I did well. I loved metalwork. I loved PE. I avoided English like the plague. But as we went on in the UK, they do what then were called GCSEs, and so at 15, so the equivalent of year 10 here, you take what were O levels and GCSEs, and I had entered into a lot of GCSEs that my teachers didn't put us in for, so it meant I had to pay for them. And because the teacher said your chance of passing is not high, so we're not going to do it.
Wow.
So I entered in for these external exams at my mum's request. And if you pass, you then have to go and get a piece of paper signed by all your teachers, and you get refunded the money that you spent on the external exam. And the one that I was really interested in doing, there were actually 2, which was English language and English literature. And my English teacher was Miss Lucy, who for whatever reason never diagnosed me as dyslexic, but she knew there was an issue. And she also knew I wasn't stupid. So she, for English literature, we did The Merchant of Venice. And I learnt The Merchant of Venice by going to the play about 4 times, and she got me out of the public library a set of 4 old vinyl albums, and I just listened to it over and over and over. And when I finished, I passed 11 GCSE O levels, which was more than most because I had entered a whole bunch of stuff myself, including English language and English literature, both with the lowest grade you can get and still consider it a pass, but all a pass all the same.
That's right.
And yeah, one of the greatest things was going and seeing her because she was so happy for me. But then I remember going from her to go and see my physics teacher, who, even though I had done very well in physics, he wouldn't enter me into the exam because I never used to do the homework. And anyway, long story short, he had to sign off on me.
So how did that make you feel that the teachers didn't want you to sit those exams, or that your family had to pay money for you to sit them because they didn't believe you would pass? Like, did that knock your self-confidence, or did it give you that grit and determination to prove them wrong?
Yeah, no, I was an angry child, so it was grit and determination for me. And my family didn't pay. I was working part-time selling jeans at that point on the market, and I paid.
Wow.
And I was determined to... So, like metalwork and technical drawing, woodwork, these are all the subjects that I had taken as my, selections through high school, because obviously I'd tried to avoid anything that required me to read or write a lot, but I couldn't get out of English and English literature. So they were the 2 most challenging, whereas everything else I was doing was like physics, chemistry, maths, metalwork, technical drawing. There was all subjects where there was limited amount of reading to be done and limited amount of writing to be done.
That's amazing. And especially that the chemistry and physics and maths, because that's still a lot of people struggle with maths. So it was good that you had that area that you felt strong in to encourage you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was weird because I used to go, as I said, my school was streamed. So I was set 1 for maths, set 1 for chemistry, set 1 for biology, remedial for English. And before we got to our options, I was remedial in a bunch of other subjects that were all language-based. And so I had a really diverse group of friends in a big school, from, what would affectionately be known as the boffins to affectionately what would be known as the troublemakers. And I scoured backwards and forwards in a day between, those classes. So school, I had a lot of fun at school, but I look back now and think how much easier it would have been and how much of the English subject I could have learned if I'd been able to acquire the knowledge differently instead of having to read it all. So like if you said to me, what's a noun, what's a pronoun, what's a verb, what's a this, what's a, I was not turned on to listen to that in class at all, ever. So even today, I would still struggle to sit down and give you a written description of those things.
I think I only really learnt that when I did my speech pathology course. And we had to look at,
Yeah.
is that a full sentence? And then you had to write which word made it a full sentence. Otherwise, I would have been the same. So how old were you then when you were diagnosed with dyslexia? It was out after school.
Yeah. I left school young, and I worked in London for a couple of years, and then I was on the way to see my dad, who was living in Perth, and I stopped in Hong Kong, and I played basketball over there for a while, and I had a job on the side for a video production company, and so I did that for sort of 4.5 years. And what I learned from my Chinese friends was that education was really important, and it was so highly valued by them and their families, where a whole family was sacrificing everything for one of my friends to be able to go to Hong Kong University. And that was the first time it really occurred to me that, this is something that must be really important if like his brother, his mum, his sister-in-law, his dad are all working to pay for him to go to university, then I need to understand a little bit more about this university thing and what goes on. And the world was slightly different then. Not as many people as a percentage went to university. But that was what made me interested in the world of academia, was my Chinese friends. And so while I was in Hong Kong, I decided, this is sort of 88, 87, somewhere around there. And lots of people were up in Asia trying to recruit, including QUT. So I sort of thought, oh, well, I'm an Australian citizen. Let's find out about this QUT. So I applied from over there and was accepted by them, not coming through a normal process. I had done some part-time study in Hong Kong to get to the point where I could sit an exam with those guys. And I came down to Australia in 89, and I sort of turned up on campus, and they told me I had to do this thing called an ELICOS course before I could start university. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's fine. And I turned up, and I didn't know what an ELICOS course was, but it turns out what it was an English language intensive course for overseas students. And so I arrive, and the guy's looking at me strangely going, so your first language is English, right? And I'm like, yep. And he's like, so what are you here for? And I'm like, I don't know. This is the piece of paper I got. Told me I got to do 3 months of this before I can start my university course. And that was when they said, oh, well, that's interesting. And he asked some questions, and then he got me to do some tests, and we spoke a little bit. And that was when, he turned around and said, why didn't you just tell us you're dyslexic? And I'm like, didn't really know exactly what that is. So, there's no Google at this point to look up these things when someone says something you don't know about. And so that was really the first time. And they gave me some opportunity to do a bit of research myself through the university library, as well as some pretty simple techniques. And at that time, computers, like we take it all so much for granted now, but the program WordStar had just come out, and I was using that on an old monochrome screen. And when I'd type up an assignment, I'd have so many words underlined that it would take me almost as long to go through and check it as it would to have written it. And I remember sometimes I'd have to get my flatmates to look at it with me, because I couldn't even guess close enough to how the word should be spelt for the computer to work out what word it was I was trying to say.
And then do people tell you to have a look in the dictionary? That always baffled me, because I think if I can't spell it, I don't think a dictionary is going to help me if I don't know the start of the word.
Yeah, well, I had all of that, but I was very fortunate. I had some good friends who were, very understanding, and they were, very happy to help. And it became a sort of bit of a running joke. I'd be sitting there with the computer, and I'd be calling out, how do you spell? How do you spell? And eventually they'd turn the telly off and all sit around and go, why don't we just go through it, Trev? Why don't we just go through it? It's going to be quicker and less annoying if you just ask us all in one go.
What a great group of friends.
And yeah, it was.
And so having your diagnosis, did that make you feel better about yourself and the challenges you'd had? How did you react once you'd had time to process it?
Well, I guess from my point of view, I was very fortunate to arrive in Hong Kong, and I played basketball at quite a serious level over there for southern China. And so I didn't feel bad about myself at all. I just thought, I'm just not a sort of, academic kind of person. So from that regard, it was okay. What it did was allowed me to understand what had gone on. And so, by simply sort of, cutting a hole in a piece of paper and tracking it down sentence by sentence, I could suddenly start absorbing knowledge, and I could actually remember it. And I didn't jumble all the words around, because before that, I'd basically read a sentence, and I'm picking words out at random that are all out of the paragraph to kind of just make sense in my head. And I'm just talking gobbledygook, it just wasn't making any sense at all. And so, before that, when I was reading stuff, sometimes I'd be reading it, 4, 5, 6, 7 times to try and understand what the hell the page was talking about.
Wow.
So yeah, for me, what it did was help in terms of my ability to be able to get through the course. Now, I'm certainly no great shakes as an academic, but I got through, and I wouldn't have got through, I think, without the help of computers, my friends, and the ability to be able to, so simple, cut a hole in a piece of paper and track it down a page.
That is really simple. And a tip that probably some of our listeners might want to try, I might suggest that to my brother, because he doesn't read a lot, but he says the words all move on the page. And I wonder what might help him.
Well, for me, it's not, I wouldn't even necessarily say they move, but I literally, if I look at a paragraph that's got sort of 5 or 6 sentences in it, I really struggle to follow it line by line, word by word. I end up picking words that are 3 or 4 lines below, a couple of lines above, one that might be before the word, one that might be after the word, and my brain will just sort of try to make sense of it all. So it's quite often what if I'm reading something, what I say will actually make sense, but it's just completely not relevant because it's not what's written in front of me. I've just picked all these different words out.
That's exhausting.
And it's oh yeah. Well, I don't read much. Even today, I have a computer talk to me a lot more than I actually read the words myself.
Yeah, it's however you can take in the information, I think, whether it's listening or reading or. So can you walk us through your working career? Because it's been very diverse, from basketball to now Shadow Minister in Parliament. So what has it been like for you?
Well, I mean, if I start right back at the beginning, I've done everything from sort of, wash cars, sell jeans. I worked in advertising agencies, and that's when I was in London. Then I worked for video production. I worked for a publisher. Probably, if I use the publisher as the example, the work I used to do for them was actually an early version of Excel, a thing called VisiCalc on a Hewlett-Packard computer. And it was all just numbers and data on spreadsheets with big, thick lines tracking everything across. So everything's in a neat little box, and all the boxes line up, and I've got lines everywhere to help me track it across. And I could do the maths of it right, so I'd be able to see if I'd made a mistake pretty quickly, because I'd look at it and go, well, that number doesn't make sense. And so, at different times I had different jobs where I could overcome it. I got into trouble a number of times for not having things spelt correctly when I've had to label things. And, in the ad agency, I remember posting off some stuff, part of my job was in the packing room, and and I've got the address completely wrong, and something really important hasn't arrived where it's supposed to be on time, and I'm in a fair bit of trouble for it. But then sort of whilst I was at university, I got into hospitality, where I worked doing security and bar work, and obviously there's very little writing involved in that, and a lot of talking and meeting people and making sure you're keeping people happy, but not a great deal of written work. And so I found working in hospitality, both whilst I was at university and then even after university, I found that industry suited me a lot because I was dealing with people. I had to be able to talk. And, when you use a till, you don't so much have to read what is on all the buttons and where you're pushing. You just have to know where they are on the till, and so I'd colour code that whole card, and you could easily work out which buttons are where without getting yourself confused because of both the colours and the position. So even today, I find using a keyboard a lot easier than handwriting because I don't get the wrong letter as often just because I know where it is on the keyboard. So it's harder to get a B and a D mixed up because they're on different places on the keyboard. Whereas if I'm writing, sometimes I'll have finished writing, and it's only when I look back at it, I'm suddenly going, "Oh, you idiot! What have you done? You've put the wrong letter there."
Yeah. So then, how did you end up in government? Because you have to read a lot and write a lot in politics.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, that would be the thing that most people would think, and to a certain extent that is true. But what I would say is, the reason I went into politics is out of frustration with the government. I was running a small business, and they kept taxing me and regulating me and giving me more and more pieces of paper to fill out. And eventually, I just got sick of it and thought, well, someone's got to go and tell them that this doesn't help people run businesses. So that's what led me to government, and a lot of that work is listening to people. A lot of that work is actioning and trying to get solutions for people. And as a local member, your job is often to help people negotiate the bureaucracy. And one part of your job is constituents who are struggling in dealing with the sheer bureaucracy of government and trying to provide them help. And so for me, I find that easy because I can listen to what they're saying, and often I can empathise because I've been that guy up against the bureaucracy, not being able to follow or understand all the rules. And, a lot of my work in that situation will be done by phoning people. I just get on the phone and go, "This is ridiculous." And they'll say, "Can you email it to me?" And I'm like, "No, but I will do a TV interview and let everybody know what I think if you don't fix it." And so that side of it has been okay. With the legislation, I've got a pair of very good headphones and a microphone. They're actually gaming headphones with a microphone, and so I can dictate, and I do that a little bit. Computers are getting better and better at listening and being able to prepare written work for that. I also use a translation company where you record it on your phone, send it off, and a couple of hours later it arrives back spelt correctly and punctuated and laid out, and then I can talk it through with staff in the office to just make sure that there's not anything silly gone on in that translation sort of process.
Yeah.
And in terms of the reading, a lot of knowledge acquisition for me is by having meetings and talking to people. And also, where I can, I will use audio books and online. And, I then get to a situation where I do have a program that will, just your Apple stuff will just read it to you. It's a little bit robotic, but if I'm reading it, I'll often get that to play at the same time so that, I've got the computer saying it and I'm following it. And that sort of helps me keep on track. And then lastly is just quite literally, I'll get the ruler out, which sits right by the edge of my desk here, and I'll 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 lay it down on the paper. In terms of delivering a speech in Parliament, when it's technical, that's when I feel the most stressed. I will have a situation where I'll either use a piece of paper and track it down the page, or I'll spread my fingers across on the line and I'll sort of go line at a time. And we use a particular typeface and a particular point size and particular spacing. And if I find myself getting lost, I literally, every single page I have prepared is a completely new topic. So that if I get lost, I'll literally, I'll either put the piece of paper to my left or my right. If I know I haven't covered it properly because I've just lost my way, I'll pull that piece of paper back out later and have another crack at it.
Wow, you've got so many strategies in place. It's amazing.
Yeah,
like your technical skills are just blow me away. I still can't get dragon speech or even dictating into my phone properly. So it's just amazing.
And they're all different things. But when I deliver a speech, Hansard are brilliant because they pick everything up and they can spell and punctuate and they do everything. So my written speeches have never looked so good as when Hansard have typed it up for me. But I often will do just a mind map. I have both a software program, but I do a lot of it just by hand. And I just do a mind map where I've sort of got, key phrases in a bubble. So if I know I've got to do 10-minute speech, I know my topic. I'll have my sort of central topic in the middle, and I'll run 10 bubbles off it, each with just maybe 2 or 3 words inside the bubble, which is the prompt. And that is then what I'll use to speak from. And,
wow. I'm going to try that.
Oh yeah, like the mind map, and I bought a program to try and make it look a bit more professional because the poor people at Parliament, they say, "Have you got any notes for your speech?" And I send them this piece of scribble, and they must look at it and go, "What has he done?"
Yeah.
But literally, the mind map for me, where I just have a 3-word central theme, and then I know, and there's a clock right in front of you, and I know that I've got to talk for 1 minute on each of these topics. And that's, as I say, the stressful ones for me are when it's technical and you're talking about clauses to a bill, and you've got to be very precise. You can't get these clauses wrong. You can't say 45 instead of 54.
Yeah.
And that's, you'll see mine are highlighted and underlined, and I'll say it a couple of times just to make sure that I get it right. And that, so I find that the most stressful. Talking off the cuff, I find much more comfortable.
So when you're doing the ones with the numbers, is that timed as well? Because I've been going to Parliament quite a bit now. I've been watching people do their speeches. So when they're the timed as well. So yeah, that would be a lot of pressure. I struggle doing public speaking normally, but I love the mind map idea because I get lost in all my pages and then I forget to turn them because I know the majority of the content, but it's just those key points that you want to make sure you don't miss.
Well, for me, it is exactly that. It is, if I know my topic and I know I've got 10 minutes and I know that I've got, I usually, if I've got 10 minutes, I'll put 9 things on the sheet, and I know that I've got a minute on each of those things with 30 in and 30 out. And often I'll even write in one of the bubbles, intro, outro, so that I know that when I click round the clock on my page, which is what I do, I sort of start at 12 o'clock and I go all the way around until I come back up with the bubbles, and then I cross them out as I go, and literally the last one says outro, and I'm like, okay, I've got 30 seconds to close this off.
That's great strategy. I'm going to test that. And I was just thinking how I would do that with my PowerPoint presentation, but whether you put the little slide and then the mind map against the slide, I'll have a little play now. That's a great strategy. Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, well, as I say, it works for me. And, what I've found in talking to other people who've had dyslexia is that there's not one solution. And there's not, certainly some people I've met have much more difficulty than I do. I would consider myself quite fortunate up against some people I've met, just simply because Mine is not as severe. It's difficult, but it's not as severe. And like I met one young lad, which is actually the reason that I decided that I should say something. And his teachers said to me, well, when he first started, we had to explain that the black bits were the words.
Oh wow!
Because he literally didn't know whether the white gaps or the black bits were which one of the words.
Do you think that was part of his literacy education, or do you think that was purely his dyslexia?
Well, I think it was probably, he would have been about 8 at the time I was talking to him, and his teachers had been doing some work with him. And I would say that it'd be a combination of things. It's like so many things. It's often not just one thing going on. There's more than one thing going on, and he had a couple of other difficulties in his life as well, but dyslexia was not helping because he was getting incredibly frustrated.
I could imagine, especially if you can't decipher the words between the white gaps. That would stop you from wanting to engage in reading at all.
Well, that is what had happened.
Yeah.
And for me again, like when I worked for the video production company in Hong Kong, we did some work for a company called McGraw-Hill, which is an education. They do books and everything else. Well, they also do videos. And so, one of the ways I acquired a whole bunch of knowledge about business was we had to translate a set of videos from a company called Video Arts into Cantonese. And some of these had John Cleese in them, so there's a lot of British humour. And they were really struggling to translate what was going on. And so I had professional people who spoke both languages, but I had to sit down and explain why that was funny or why that comedy was there. So some of those training videos I'd have watched 25 times just trying to get the translation right. So by the end of it, the topic. And in today's world with YouTube and so many more technical ways you can absorb knowledge, I think that it's a great time to be dyslexic in terms of there are lots of ways you can acquire knowledge.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I definitely wouldn't have got this far without technology and all the things that have come along in the last 15 years. We are really, really lucky to be in this time. You wrote your speech for Parliament during October for National Dyslexic Awareness Month, and you bravely opened up about your experience of dyslexia and the importance of looking at how we address it in the community. So it's been a month since you did that. How have you felt since then, and what's been the reaction from your family and colleagues and people around you?
Look, it's actually been very positive. And, one of the reasons I never come out publicly was not out of embarrassment or anything else. It was literally, I don't want anybody to compensate because I can't do this. I never wanted to be treated differently or for someone to say, oh, poor Trevor. I've always been a bit of a fighter. And so I never wanted to play, the so-called victim card. So for me, I kept it quiet so that people, wouldn't give me any leniency for it because I didn't want any. But the reason I came out was because I think it's important that people recognise that this is quite prevalent in our community, and that there are certain things that dyslexics can offer, which is a different view. So quite often I would find myself in a group of 10 people, and we'd be talking through an issue, and I just have a different point of view to everybody else. And at first I thought, well, maybe I'm just argumentative, but it literally is my brain is just looking at the problem differently.
Yeah.
And so I think as I've got older, I realised that potentially the thing that makes me look at problems differently to other people is because my brain is wired a little differently. And that's a strength, not a weakness. It means that, if you put a whole bunch of people in a room and none of them are dyslexic, they probably are all going to think the same and see the same solution, which may actually not be the best way forward at all. Whereas I think when you have someone in the room who's thinking differently, just because they don't even realise they're thinking differently, they're just wondering why everybody else is agreeing with everything. In part of my role now with corrections is, looking at prisons and what is overrepresented in prisons, and we have several different types of minorities that are overrepresented in prisons, but one of those things that flows through fairly strongly as a percentage is people with learning difficulties, and dyslexia is right up there amongst those learning difficulties. So we owe it to those people to try and show them that there's an alternate path, and that if they're willing to do some of the work, they can get themselves onto a different track.
Yeah, it's such significant work, isn't it, trying to engage young people so they don't end up going down that track. I think there really is a percentage of young people that end up in the justice system because they're dyslexic. I mean, there are some that, there are other reasons, but I think if we can help some of those young people so they don't end up down that path would be an amazing achievement. I feel like I would have done my job.
And look, I agree. But one of the things is people often say, we've got to help people to be literate. And I'm like, well, no, actually we don't. We have to help people acquire the knowledge that they need, and we have to help them to be able to communicate in the ways that they can. And so, the idea, like if I look at let's take our Indigenous brothers and sisters, First Nations people. Well, if someone was dyslexic before we landed with a written language, it didn't matter at all. In actual fact, it may have been an advantage to their tribe because they've got someone who's looking at problems from a different perspective. But because everything was passed down, through dance, through storytelling, through an oral tradition, the idea of dyslexia was, virtually irrelevant. And they did just fine for 40,000 years. So there's no reason we can't do just fine. The question is, how do we pass knowledge on? How do we expand knowledge? How do we help people acquire and be able to communicate effectively? And technology can help a lot with that. And so to me, the idea of making everybody literate, of course, is a wonderful goal, but having a set of processes by which you can acquire all the knowledge you want and communicate it to all the people who it needs to be communicated to is actually a slightly different goal, and may actually be more helpful for some people who simply can't become literate to the extent that, for want of a better example, academia might require.
Yeah, and that's such a nice message because it's knowledge that's the power. And I mean, we talk about education is a basic human right, and I guess it's how you are educated. And when we talk, it's not, we need to put interventions in early for children, but some children are always going to struggle with their literacy skills. So how do you get them to a point where their literacy skills are at a, they can manage day to day, but then they can absorb that knowledge in different ways to learn? It's such a powerful message.
I think, I am very fortunate because I can function in the world. If someone gives me a business card, if I just take my time and I'm not tired and I focus, I can read all of the information on the business card without any trouble. I can sit down and read a book. I might have to go back over a few pages several times because it doesn't sink in. But, what I do is I subscribe to the great courses, and, I'm learning all the history that I wished I'd learned when I was at school because I'm just listening to effectively podcasts and broadcasts of this knowledge and information, which in any civilization that had an oral tradition, this was perfectly normal to learn and acquire through storytelling and dance and visual cues and everything else. I mean, our First Nations people knew where the water holes were. It wasn't because someone wrote it down and gave them a book with them all listed. And so whether you could read that book or not didn't matter. What mattered is if you knew where the water hole was.
That's right.
and it's the knowledge that's important, not the document. And so, to me, if we, that's not a reason to not try and help everybody be, what I'd call functionally literate. But at the point, we may well be missing out if we're over focusing on giving someone a set of literacy skills that their brain just won't let them acquire, and not pouring in the knowledge. I mean, if I had watched a bunch of videos, and they're probably all available now, I just haven't had the inclination, but for me to learn all of those grammar structure and the meaning of all of those words, that the pronouns and the this and the that and all the different things, well, I can acquire all of that by watching videos. I don't need to read a book to acquire any of that. And to me, I think to a certain extent we may have over-focused where some people, their skill set lies elsewhere. People who may be fantastic with a memory or storytelling or songwriter or whatever, but they're never going to be a great written academic.
And I wonder if it's because more and more people are going to university now. There's an expectation that young people will just go, but there's still such a place for trades and other types of employment. But I wonder if that's
there's
putting
no
more
doubt.
and more pressure.
Well, I mean, obviously I have great esteem for academia, and that the high level research, to me, whenever we've got a problem in the world, someone who's capable of researching and analysing and putting that together and then articulating the solutions, that is a fantastic skill set. But it's not the only skill set, and there are going to be people who can have some great ideas without being able to write a 10,000 word essay on how to express those ideas. And, someone who's a great orator may, in fact, not necessarily be a great writer, but they may be able to really, really speak publicly well without having to do that. Whereas, for me, if I'm reading a speech in a parliament, how on earth Hansard stays awake, I don't know, because it is so robotic and mechanical and free of any expression, and because I'm literally reading the words in like this, and nobody's acquiring what I'm saying as knowledge. The only way you could possibly acquire that would be to read it later, because if you're listening to it, you're gonna go to sleep. So to me, it is about horses for courses and early identification, so that everybody can get what I'd call, functionally literate in our community, so that they can read a road sign, they can, do all those functional things. But we need to be very careful, and I see it in my office, people who, for whatever reason, we find they've forgotten their glasses when they're asked to fill a form in. And it's because they're not literate. Now, whether that's through lack of education or whether that's through a learning difficulty, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't mean that they're not any worthy, as worthy in our community. That just means we need to provide the knowledge in an alternate format. So, for me, videos, podcasts, YouTube, all of these things are so powerful to have for people who are growing up with some of the difficulties I had.
That's really strong, powerful messaging. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our listeners who might be struggling in school or the workplace or in life? I mean, you've given so many tips. It's been fantastic. I'm really excited to go and try some. But any key messages?
Look, for me, if I had my time again, I'd probably get less angry, and that might be useful, because sometimes people overlooked what I was trying to do because of behaviour. So as a young person, I would say, you need to find where your strengths lie, and if they don't lie in the written and word, then where do they lie? And it may be that you're a great craftsperson. It may be that you're artistic. It could be that you're musical. Now, that's not a reason to not apply yourself to get yourself to a base level. But follow your passions and follow your strengths. And if reading is not one of your strengths, then acquire the knowledge in other ways. And we live in a time where that is very possible.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's just been wonderful to listen to your story and all the ways that you manage day to day. It's been great. Thank you so much, Trevor. I really appreciate it.
No, well, look, I appreciate the opportunity. If it helps one person, then I maybe should have outed myself a long time ago. But as I say, it was, the reason I kept it to myself is because I never wanted anybody to make an exception. I've always been a fighter, and so if you are struggling out there, be a fighter, but don't be so proud that you won't ask for help, which is maybe something I suffered from along the way.
Well, I don't think it's ever too late to come out and to talk about being dyslexic, and hopefully people that have listened to your story might encourage other leaders or people in positions where they can influence and support to come out if they've got dyslexia as well. So thank you so much and really appreciate your time.
No, great. Really appreciate yours. Good luck with the podcast.
Thanks, Trevor. To find out more about Trevor's story and to see all the work he did during our National Dyslexic Awareness Month campaign, head to the Dear Dyslexic website. If you haven't already done so yet, make sure you sign up to our mailing list so you can keep up to date with everything we do at the Foundation. Head to deardyslexic.com. And don't forget, if there is anything you have heard today that was distressing, please call Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36 or Lifeline on 13 11 14. If there is a topic you would like discussed on the show, please email us admin@deardyslexic.com. I hope you've enjoyed today. Bye for now.